I don't know when this video is going to air, but there's rumor going around that the jobs numbers, the BLS numbers, are going to be downwardly revised by somewhere from 600,000 to 1 million on Wednesday this week. I don't know if that's going to play out or not.
All hell is about to break loose with unemployment as consumers are desperately looking for part-time jobs just to afford to live. Now, this is an absolute catastrophe for our economy, as our economy needs roughly 70%. Well, or rather, 70% of GDP is from consumer spending. 70% of consumers are living paycheck to paycheck. So we got a lot going on with the labor market. I have our channel friend and colleague, Jack, with Nobody Special Finance, with us today, here to help us break this down. Now, before I give him the mic, make sure you stop by his YouTube channel, Nobody Special Finance. Give him a like, give him a comment, let him know that we sent you. This is a great guy. Again, I consider him a friend. And don't forget, you guys, Monday through Friday, Jack does lives in the morning at, Jack, 9 a.m. Eastern.
There you go. Nailed it.
8 a.m. Central. Took me a long time to get that right. Brains cross-wired, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Travis. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, of course, man. So I'm going to get started right away for the viewers. The first thing I want to do is I want to talk about why unemployment is such a big deal and how essentially, Jack, it's unstoppable for a period of time once it starts, and really how the Fed is reactionary and really can't stop it. Now, take a look at this. When you ask the question, what impact unemployment has on the economy, this is what comes up. General economic impact of high unemployment. I thought this was a decent breakdown, Jack. Increased unemployment has considerable adverse effects on the economy, primarily reducing consumer spending, which is a critical component of economic growth. So employment is obviously very important. With more individuals out of work, there is a decline in disposable income, leading to lower demand for goods and services, further exacerbating the economic downturns. Now, this last part right here, specific economic costs. High unemployment incurs several economic costs, including lost output as the labor force diminishes, decreased consumer expenditure due to reduced incomes, diminished tax revenues from fewer individuals paying taxes, and increased, this is crazy to think about, but increased government spending on social welfare programs. Jack, before we even go into the more government printing, and we'll talk about, reactionary, we'll talk about all that type of stuff, but can you tell the viewers, and I really respect your opinion, your insights here, why is unemployment such an issue for the economy? And obviously not when it's going down, right, and 3% like it's been, but that trajectory upward. Why is that so damaging to the economy, sir?
So that article that you were just referencing touched on it very briefly there, and it mentioned the slowdown in consumer spending, and that's going to be your biggest immediate impact from a rise in unemployment. The United States in particular, we're a very consumer-driven economy. The statistic is somewhere around 70% of our gross domestic product comes from consumption. And so higher unemployment, you can't consume if you don't have a paycheck, right? It makes it harder to buy food. It makes it harder to go on vacation, harder to go out to the movies, eat at restaurants, anything. And it's important to point out that after the last few years of inflation, which has dramatically outpaced wage gains, we're already at a point where consumption is struggling here, right? The average consumer, he's got no discretionary income left. He's spending the entirety of his paycheck. The average middle-class person is going to either rent or mortgage and then food and utilities, and there's very little left over. And I saw a statistic today that shows searches for things like flights, cruises, and hotels are in decline. Just the number of people that are Googling hotel rooms and cruises and flights is down dramatically. So you can already see how just the rise in unemployment that we've had so far, combined with the increase in inflation, people aren't taking vacations this year. It's hurting travel. And so that consumption is already slowing. If you add increased unemployment on top of that, it's going to really accelerate that decline in consumption. So that's the biggest hit right there, is consumption being 70% of the economy. That's your most direct output right there.
It's interesting, Jack, because we don't have to guess anymore. We have data, by the way, that's probably fraud, manipulated data, but we have that data that's now suggesting that there actually are problems. And I want to direct your attention and the viewers' attention to this. This came out August 19th, and I want to read this because again, this is an insight to consumers. And, like you hit the nail on the head, consumers are getting strapped right now. You can't really pay attention to these mainstream narratives. And the fact is if you've been listening to us, you've been buckling down, and you're probably a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? Hedged, Jack? Is that the word I'm looking for there?
Maybe prepared, hedged,
Prepared.
anticipating trouble on the horizon. I think most people can see that coming now.
This is from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Here's the headline right here. SCE labor market survey shows sharp increase in job seekers with current job satisfaction deteriorates. Okay, now right here it says the proportion of individuals who reported searching for a job in the past 4 weeks rose to 28.4%. What? From 19.4% year over year. So July 2023, 19.4. That goes up sharply. Again, the people in the past, this is crazy to me. I'm going to read this again. The proportion of individuals who reported searching for a job in the past 4 weeks was 28.4% of people. My gosh, Jack. And that's the highest reading since March of 2014. Also, look at this. Average reservation wage is going down when we compare March to July. Jack, when you look at things like that, when you look at the consumer sentiment in these things, what do you think we can see there? What can we learn from that data?
So, job seekers on the rise from 19.4% to 28.4%. That's, by the way, that's a 46% increase from where we were a year ago. That's a pretty substantial increase. So the number of job seekers rising, that is the demand for jobs rising, right? The demand is on the rise. So labor, like anything else, is beholden to supply and demand. The supply of labor is growing. We've got people coming into the country, right? Millions of people are coming in. The demand for labor is actually slowing somewhat, or at the very least, it's stagnant. So supply and demand are somewhat out of balance. You've got more people looking for jobs than there are jobs available. And so what happens when there's more people competing for the same job? People start to they're willing to accept a lower price. The price comes down, and supply and demand works that way. And you could see that on that page that you were showing just a minute ago. What did they call it? Reservation wage. The price that these job seekers, there it is in red and blue. In March of this year, it was $81,822. The average reservation wage, that's the average wage a person is willing to accept to either change jobs or take a job being offered. That is down $700 from where we were just a few months ago. So when it comes to labor, it's a buyer's market. The price is dropping because there's more job seekers than there are jobs available. So we're seeing in these numbers here the reduced tightness in the labor market, as Jerome Powell likes to tell us during his Federal Reserve press conferences. It's just not that strong a job market anymore. So, it's pretty alarming to see that reservation wage coming down when we're still in a pretty inflationary environment, right? Inflation's still 2.9%, according to the most recent CPI. And when it comes to wages and cost of living, for the last several years, cost of living has far, far outpaced wage growth. And so to see that reservation wage coming down now, that's pretty alarming. That means people are getting more desperate than I think is being advertised in the financial press.
Well, let's look at the household survey and double check those numbers. The most recent household survey, which, by the way, you introduced this to the channel. Big shout out to you. I don't know if people realize that. I absolutely love your work, man. But I wanted to bring your attention first to the top here, what says job losers and persons who completed temporary jobs. Now, month over month, we had essentially 314,000 people that completed temporary jobs, which means it wasn't really, it wasn't a real
or
job.
Lost their job, right? That's the other thing. That either they got laid off, fired, or it was their temp work and their contract ran out. And I'm willing to bet most of that is probably people who lost their job, not temps finishing work.
And when we look at the year over year comparison, I mean, it's not even comparable. I mean, before that was look at right here, 2.7, now 3.4. But I also want to come down here, Jack, where it says part-time for economic reasons. So this is not necessarily, a second job, but part-time job for economic reasons. Substantial month over month increase going from 4.22 million to 4.56 million, which means in 1 month, 346,000 people look for a part-time job for economic reasons. And not only that, it's very interesting. When you look down here, it says part-time jobs for non-economic reasons. That's actually down. See this? 305,000. So in my eyes, this is proof positive that the labor market is getting destroyed right now. And literally any day now, the whole thing can blow over with a small gust of wind. I mean, honestly, when we take out the government deficit and the government spending and all of the things that are propping this up and the fraud and all that, it's already going to come crashing down. But unfortunately, we have to equate stimulus. We have to equate these types of things. And so when you look at that, when you look at the state, when you're looking at under the hood, I mean, can you explain, Jack, how when the Fed does print, because they probably will, that's more of a reaction to already skyrocketing unemployment? In other words, do you think the Fed can stop these trends from happening outside of some type of universal income?
No, the Fed is notoriously late to the party every time, right? They wait too long to stop printing. They wait too long to start raising rates. They wait too long to stop raising rates. They wait too long to start cutting rates. But they're always looking in the rearview mirror and making decisions about where they're going to go next based on what's already behind them. So the Fed is notoriously late to the party. And there is a growing consensus right now that the Fed has waited too long to cut interest rates. Now, I don't necessarily buy into that logic because I don't really think the Fed waited too long to cut. You could argue that they hiked too long. I mean, when banks started failing last March, the Fed continued raising interest rates when it was high interest rates that were causing the banks to fail. So I'm more of the camp that they waited too long to stop printing the money, or maybe they never should have printed to begin with, but that's water under the bridge. Then they wait too long to start cutting. And so we're already seeing unemployment start to rise here. And within those statistics, and you hinted at it a little bit there with the household survey, those part-time numbers, I think, are masking a much bigger weakness in the labor market, because those people who work in part-time for economic reasons can't get full-time work. So they're a barista at Starbucks instead of a middle manager at some button pushing factory or, a widget assembly line. That person, from the unemployment rate perspective, looks the same. Somebody working part-time at Starbucks looks the same as the president of the factory. It's a person with a job. But when it comes down to what's the take-home pay look like? What is the economic activity generated from that job? What is that person out in the economy spending? Apples and oranges. So we've seen a big jump in part-time work in these last year and a half, 2 years or so. And it's been masking a big decline in full-time work. And we've also seen a lot of people getting second and third jobs. Again, it makes job creation numbers look better. Oh, look at all the jobs that were added. But, hey, maybe 30,000 of that 100,000 jobs that were added is people getting second jobs because their job that used to pay the bills no longer does. That's not a sign of prosperity. Now, there's a little bit of a positive spin to that. At least that person who wants a second job can find one, or at least that was the case last year. I don't think that's going to be the case for much longer, though.
Yeah. And can I ask you, Jack, do you think that a large reason why we're in this situation, again, just taking outside the fact of the decades of fraud and corruption, too much stimulus, right? Because the Fed is reactionary, we had too much stimulus. In other words, those low interest rates were designed to keep us out of depression. I mean, with the amount of money, my God, right? Recession is what they told us, but the reality is they may be keeping us out of the 2008 depression. I mean, do you think that, they just kicked do you think we still have a price to pay for the 2008 recession? And I ask that because if you do think that, then we are potentially in store for double-digit unemployment. Do you disagree with that?
No, I think 10% unemployment is feasible here. I think we could very easily see that number. Once unemployment starts rising, it tends to accelerate to the upside. We're already seeing that 0.2% increase that we got 2 weeks ago on Friday. I mean, I think it was 3 weeks ago now, when we went from 4.1 to 4.3 unexpectedly. that caught a lot of people off guard. Once that unemployment rate starts ticking up, it accelerates to the upside. Now, you mentioned stimulus before. It's important to point out that stimulus isn't just the helicopter money that we got in 2020 and 2021. Stimulus is also unrealistically low interest rates. And when you mentioned we still have the price to pay for 2008, if you look at what interest rates did following the GFC, interest rates went down to zero and they stayed there until, when was the first rate hike? At the end of 2015, there was one rate hike, and then they waited like another year before they started hiking again.
8 years of like 0%.
Now, when interest rates are that low, you've got companies that don't make money that should be going out of business because this is bad investment. This is money being invested in cash burning operations, companies that should not exist. They're able to go to the bond market at near zero interest and borrow money to stay alive. And so unemployment that should have hit years ago, these companies should have gone belly up in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, all the way up to this year. These companies that should have gone bankrupt a long time ago have stayed alive by just taking on bigger and bigger piles of debt. And every time that debt comes due, interest rates are even lower now. So yeah, we can refinance that debt, make the debt pile even bigger. The debt service cost goes down. We can keep this cash burning business alive even longer. And that worked right up until 2022 when interest rates started to rise. And when interest rates started to rise, now that pain, as that debt matures, these companies need to refinance that debt. They can't because they're refinancing into higher interest rates, and the debt service cost is not sustainable because these companies don't make any money. So they go out of business. And so we've got arguably a decade and a half, maybe even 2 decades worth of companies that should have failed for whatever reason. Businesses fail all the time, but these artificially low interest rates created by the Fed kept those businesses alive. And much the same way those low interest rates made the collective pain in the commercial real estate market that we're experiencing now, it made that worse because a lot of these buildings should have defaulted on their debt years ago. A lot of these multifamilies and malls, my God, why are malls still running? I was at a mall today. I took my daughter to a cooking school at this place that's running in a mall right now. There was nobody there. Nobody. The music was playing, all this, the lights are on and everything, but there's just nobody there shopping. I was one of like maybe 10 people. And this is a giant mall in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, like peak consumer retail space. But it's still there because of those low interest rates, because as these malls continue losing money, they just borrow more at lower rates to stay alive. And well, now rates are higher. And I think we're probably entering a long-term period of consistently higher interest rates, even though we're talking about cutting pretty soon. I think interest rates for the next 40 years could be heading higher. These companies are all going to fail. And it's pain that we should have already felt.
High interest rates are a sign of a thriving economy, or if you look at the 70s and 80s, a sign of horrible inflation battle. But, you know, Jack, let's be realistic here. I mean, we know what's been going on. I mean, you even enhanced it when you were talking about the 70s and how that wage gap really exploded. You know, what we see here, beyond a shadow of doubt, especially teaming up with you and other colleagues, you know, this has been very clear. We see something called Keynesian economics. It's a socialism type of economics where the government comes to save the day. And then there's the other type of economics called Austrian economics, where it says if you do that, if the government comes in and manipulates currency, there's just eventually going to be a bigger price to pay. But some also say, Jack, that a little bit of government intervention is necessary, and that could have potentially prevented long and deep depressions. Do you think that there is a balance between Keynesian and Austrian economics, or do you think that there's absolutely no place for any type of government intervention?
I do think there's a balance between Keynesian and Austrian economics. Keynesian economics needs to go, and Austrian economics needs to be in charge. I think that's the balance that we need to find. Look, Austrian economics, the main principle behind Austrian economics is that there's a natural boom and bust cycle to economic growth. You get periods of credit expansion that leads to economic boom. But as that credit expands, you tend to get bad investment because money is plentiful. Bad investment leads to malinvestment, leads to waste. Businesses start to contract, and then you get the credit bust. And some of those businesses fail. They need to be allowed to fail. And then eventually that bust creates hard times, that business conditions, leaner businesses survive. They come out of it healthier. And then eventually we change back to the boom. And Austrian economics pretty closely resembles how things work in nature, right? Like whenever you've got a species that begins to thrive, say the deer are doing really well, all right? The deer start to thrive. They're having more babies. Now you've got more deer, but the deer start to exhaust the food supply. They've grown too much. And now the deer are starting to get less healthy and they start to get this wasting disease or things that happen. They're emaciated. And now the predators are moving back in because there's so many of the deer and they're weaker because they're malnourished. And then the deer start to die off. Nature has this natural boom bust cycle. And look, our economy, like we like to think we're not part of nature anymore, like we exist outside of nature, but we don't. We're animals and we're dependent on resources that are scarce and limited. And so our economics is the same way. It's managed the same way nature manages economics with this natural boom bust cycle. The Austrians recognize that. They don't try to interfere it. They try to adapt to it. The Keynesians think the government can come in and make that obsolete. And every time the bust starts, we can just print money, pump it into the economy, and then that decline never happens. And well, what do you think happens if we don't let the predators come in and, eat the struggling deer? Or we don't do anything to control the population of the deer and we just let them continue to expand out of control? They're going to get weaker and slower, and eventually they're going to go extinct because the ecosystem hasn't been managed. So yeah, the balance between Keynesianism and Austrian economics is get rid of Keynesian and let the Austrians have a turn. That's the balance.
I mean, and if we were built on kind of an Austrian economics like the US was, and these people are, you know that they know these things, right? They know that it's natural. Boom bust is natural. Jack, why are they not allowing us to bust? Because what it seems like is right when we need that bust, where that relief would actually transition eventually to the consumers. I would think eventually, right? It just seems like they bail out the finance institutions. That debt is thrown on us and our children from my grandparents. I mean, why don't they just let it bust, Jack? I don't, why not just get this over with? It's natural.
Bust doesn't perform so well in focus groups. Bust doesn't poll so well in election season. Bust doesn't go over so well with a populace that on average, I think, has the mentality of a spoiled child, right? Try to explain the boom bust cycle to a kid on a sugar high and try to explain to that kid on the sugar high, it's time to take away the sugar because you're turning into a little a-hole right now and you're bouncing off the walls and you're breaking my stuff and making a mess. No more sugar for you. That kid's going to throw a tantrum. And hey, guess what? That's how politics in the United States operates. And that's why the Keynesians come in. Right as the Austrians take away the sugar, here comes the Keynesian and says, oh, you can have more sugar. Here you go. That bad man wants to take away your sugar. You shouldn't pay any attention to that bad man. That's why Keynesians rule right now.
I mean, so they have Main Street addicted. At least that's what they tell us. But you know what I think, Jack? I don't think that's true. I think they've got people brainwashed. I think Main Street, like we just want, like you point out all the time, we want to be left alone. But certainly people are struggling. And for the viewers, I want you guys to remember something called U6. Okay, so U6 is something called underemployment. You can still get a job. And back when I lost everything, I couldn't even get a job. So Jack's right. At least you can get a part-time job, second job. Still very hard out there. Not saying it's not, but the dynamics are still different, right? And so take a look at this. U6, okay? Again, underemployment. Now, right now, this is very interesting because it's relatively high when we look at the last great financial crisis, okay, the GFC. We're at 8.2%. So 8.2% minimum, guys. Minimum 8.2%. And Jack will correct me if I'm wrong. Americans feel like they're underemployed. I don't know why it's not 100%, quite frankly, but whatever. What's very interesting is, again, the month before the recession, November of 2007, the underemployment was 8.1. And guys, come on, don't you think they're going to revise the 8.2? They're going to revise this higher. They're probably going to revise this higher. So what I'm saying is we have a worse underemployment problem than we did going into the great financial crisis. And then just real quick, here's the, vanilla U3. This is called the U3. This is the normal unemployment rate. Okay. Historically, 4.3 is low. But what's really important to understand is, number one, this data is fraud and you can't lean on it. But regardless, it's what we have. And the other thing is that when the trajectory goes up, we go into recession. You see it here in this recession. You see it here in this recession, here in this recession, this recession, this recession, this recession, this recession, and all of these recessions. And now you see it right here. We're just waiting on recession.
You can see, look at all the prior spikes in unemployment. You can see that once it starts to turn upward, it's very quickly, it just goes vertical, right? Every time. Now it stops at different levels, but every time it starts to turn upward, very briefly afterward, it shoots higher. So, looking at this, it's pretty clear that we've started to turn upward where we're at right now, and that vertical is any day now. We're going to start going vertical. And they're going to try to blame whatever politician, whoever wins the election or whoever was prior or whatever. There's going to be all this finger pointing. I think it's happening no matter what happens in the next election. Could you bring the chart up again for a second? There's another important visual I want to point out. When I talked about that pain deferred from the GFC and how those years of low interest rates, look at that spike at COVID and look at where we're at right now. If you take away the whole vid, just get rid of it. Like we're going to Photoshop this puppy, take out the spike and the immediate aftermath. Look at how that curve, it's almost like COVID never happened. Because this higher unemployment, it's not so much a function of the stimulus and everything that we just had in 2021 and 22, which in my opinion will make the eventual fallout worse. But I do think this rise in unemployment is long overdue. We should have seen it in the teens, and we didn't see it yet. Yes. But you can kind of tell if you cut out COVID there. I mean, that chart lines up perfectly, doesn't it? It was coming either way.
But also what lines up perfectly is, Operation Twist and the whole quantitative easing that happened in 2012 and the lowering of interest rates. I mean, that's what it took not only to have homes reverse their negative equity. If you look at homes reversing negative equity, it took that bailout in 2012. That was unnatural. That's what I'm saying, dude. The housing market's the foundation of cards. That's not this video. But it also dropped unemployment. It put more liquidity in the market, dropped unemployment. And you're right, man. Even with the trillions of dollars, Jack, we should be thriving, brother. We should be doing well. It's trending freaking upward. So maybe that is, our past, the sins of our fathers, man. Isn't that so?
Look, interest rates, Travis. Interest rates is the price of money. All right, and supply and demand. The laws of economics are no different than the laws of physics. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about your idealistic view of a perfect world. They just are, right? Gravity just pulls down towards the largest mass, right? That's just how it is. And when we block free market signals, the price of money, interest rates, should be dependent by the supply of money and the demand for money. And when we have a Federal Reserve comes in and they artificially lower the price of money, they make money more plentiful than it should be, you're interfering with the natural order of things in the economy, and you create problems just like the explosion of the deer population. Back to that metaphor, you can't mess with an ecosystem and expect there not to be unintended consequences. And those unintended consequences are the higher employment that's coming here. And I think it's going to go a lot higher than it otherwise would have if they had just left everything alone, just let the ship right itself after the GFC. Maybe the short-term pain in 2009 and 10 would have been a lot worse, but we'd be a hell of a lot better off now than we are.
Having said that, how long do you think that we'll even need to stay in recession, Jack, for us to get some type of bust that is enough bust, or we don't have to keep going through this crazy natural, as you say, natural cycle? Is there a way to put a stop to this ferocious cycle?
You're talking a lot of variables there, right? For all we know, World War III is next week. So it's hard to plan what the economic cycle and the boom bust cycle is going to do if you might have, this 1,000-year geopolitical bloodbath on the horizon. You've also got things like derivatives and, gross exposure at banks. There's so much going on that we can't even see in the banking system that it's hard to really even define the size and scope of the problem to be able to say how bad it's going to be coming out of that, or, maybe we even go through another 2 or 3 iterations of this easy money and lowering interest rates to try to avoid that before it ever does come to a head. I mean, for all we know, we could be sitting here in 2027 having the same conversation after 2 or 3 more rounds of stimulus.
Do you think that there's a capacity to do that, Jack?
Capacity.
Well, let me explain. A capacity to do it while at the same time defaults don't explode, to heaven through the skies into the next galactic universe, because defaults are just that trajectory, and now no one can pay for nothing.
So yes, there is capacity. It can happen, but the intervention would have to be bigger and bigger. It would take stimulus that would even make COVID stimulus look small, right? The COVID stimulus made the GFC stimulus look small. The COVID stimulus was that big. And the GFC stimulus made the .com stimulus look small. So with each cycle, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So, we kind of had this out on DNN over the weekend too. Like, what if they come out with $20 trillion of stimulus next time? Let's not put it past them. We're talking about price controls right now. And I mean, we have a presidential candidate talking about rigging prices at the grocery store as if that hasn't been an abject catastrophe anywhere and everywhere it's ever been attempted. Let's not rule out a $20 trillion stimulus package. If President Cackling Kamala comes out of this with a majority in Congress and the House, that's what you're going to get. So I wouldn't rule it out. It's the 2020s. It can happen. It would make things worse in the long run, but it is plausible.
Well, let me ask you this, okay? If we know that the problem, again, that we're facing right now was caused by excessive stimulus, then why would the solution be stimulus? How are they spinning this, Jack? Just drug addicts, here's your drugs.
Yeah, why would a heroin addict take a bigger fix, right? He's not thinking long term. He can't think long term. You know what? He's being overpowered.
That's the problem. There's some good people, and then there's innocent victims that are struggling, but there's an overwhelming amount of people that they're not doing anything, Jack. They're not getting up. They're not changing. What's the solution here, brother, for the individual American?
Solution for the, what could you tell somebody in 1928 that would have prepared somebody for the Great Depression? I think about this all the time because, I've got a family and I've got kids and I want to prepare them for the worst possible outcome. I mean, at some point, you have to realize some of this stuff just isn't within your own control. I keep some of my wealth outside of the financial system. I like to own a little bit of physical gold and silver. I own a little bit of Bitcoin. So if we go the route of widespread bank failures and everybody's wealth gets wiped out, I've still got a little bit there. At the same time, if we do get a deflationary bust like we got in 1929, things like gold and silver actually go down in value in that scenario because dollars are scarce. So it's really hard to plan for something because there's a fork in the road. When that day comes, we're going to go one of two directions. We're either going to let it happen and the world will correct in a very deflationary way. Asset prices will go down, including houses, stocks, everything will go down substantially. Interest rates will skyrocket, and it will be a period of extreme austerity globally. I think that's probably the best outcome for the future, and it's also probably the least likely outcome just given the state of our leadership. So the more plausible scenario is the bazooka and the fire hose of stimulus comes back because people have short-term memory loss. When times get tough, when they lose their jobs, everybody's going to forget transitory. Everybody's going to forget how the stimulus drove up the cost of living. When the politicians offer the helicopter money, they're going to say, yes, please, may I have some more? So
do you think the next, collapse, like official, right? Like I already feel the collapse myself, but do you think that the next collapse, Jack, is going to be a segue into a new currency?
No, I don't.
Pity.
At least right now, I mean, when you say a new currency, you're talking about like a replacement for the dollar as the global reserve.
Yes, and whether it's from the U.S. or not. So say that, fine, the U.S. comes up with the CBDC, just a different currency, versus the dollar. Obviously, the system broke. It's rampant with fraud. It's unrepairable. The math doesn't work. You got decades on decades of fraud. So we need a new system.
I do think the CBDC is they'll try it. I hope people resist it with all available with every ounce of their strength and being, because the CBD is a tyrant's wet dream, a central bank digital currency, and they're already pushing for this in a lot of places. Programmable money, you can create demand out of thin air, right? You can, with programmable money, with a CBDC, you can go and say 5% of everybody's net worth is now only allowed to be spent on cars, and watch how the car industry explodes. Watch how the price of cars goes significantly higher because everybody in the world is out there. They can only spend that money on cars. And you could also see things like rationing. You know, we're already talking about freaking price controls at grocery stores, right? Price controls at grocery stores lead to shortages every time, every single time. Well, if you've got a CBDC, then you can come and say, you know what, I'm programming this money. Jack's wallet is only allowed to buy 1 dozen eggs a month. And now I can control the demand for eggs with my programmable money, so I can prevent the shortages. I can prevent the price from rising. I can block those free market signals by just shutting off Jack's ability to buy eggs when I determine arbitrarily that he's had enough. And so that's another, I mean, we're talking like 1984. And again, it's the 2020s. Let's not, do I need to put this on right now? Do I need to break out? Let's not put it past them in the 2020s. All right, Travis, it could happen. Sorry, I'm merchandising on your channel.
Brother, I'm going to be honest, man. I got my tinfoil suit. You ain't even ready for my tinfoil suit. Neither is the world, but continue, please.
You're going to look like a big Pop-Tart. Yeah. So outside of dystopian overreach, creating a new currency, there's nothing else in the world that's anywhere near in a position to be able to supplant the dollar as a global reserve. The only thing that comes close, and a lot of people laugh when I say this, is Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the only thing that comes close, and even Bitcoin is still a long, long way away from being a global reserve currency. But it is gaining steam. It's legal tender in some countries now. More and more central banks are holding it on their books. So it could be Bitcoin, but that would require the ruling elites in the West to voluntarily give up their power without a war, which they typically don't do. So again, that's pretty far-fetched. And that's why I think probably not. We won't get a new currency anytime soon.
Next 2 decades?
Probably not. No, Bitcoin will be I think within two decades, Bitcoin will be much more widely adopted, but still a long ways off from replacing the dollar for global trade. And BRICS won't do it. BRICS, I hear about BRICS all the time. A lot of people think BRICS are going to do it. The BRICS countries can't agree on what time it is, what to have for dinner, let alone a new reserve currency. So
I mean, and they don't trust each other, right? I mean, no one's going to trust anyone, obviously. But what it does show, Jack, is that they are tired of the dollar being a weapon of mass destruction. I mean, the U.S. is bullying other countries around. But the worst thing is, and the point of this video is also bullying around their citizens. And the way the spending is going, the budget, the dog and pony show in Congress, the Senate. I mean, it sucks, man. And so I just want to encourage people. Another solution is to strengthen your community, love the people in your life, your relationships. Remember what life is about, people that you love and enhancing and just all of those things, guys. Now, I want to also add, don't give up. Things are hard right now. It's okay to temporarily lose your purchasing power, temporarily lose your savings. But again, you guys, don't give up because it's a lot easier to rebound as long as you don't give up. Now, again, go to Jack's channel, Nobody's Special Finance on YouTube. I'm going to get you guys out of here. Jack, you want to give any last words?
I think where we're at right now is very similar to the 1970s. And in the 1970s, there was 3 distinct waves of inflation, and they got worse with each level. And right, the inflation of the 1970s, it didn't go up and stay up for the decade, and then it came down with Paul Volcker. It came way up, way down, then it went up even higher and came way down, and then it went up even higher. It came in waves. We're just coming out of the first wave right now, and our government is still acting like printing money and spending more money is how you solve the problems, which means inflation will come back. I do think we're probably heading to deflation, or at least lower inflation in the ultra short term, like what we had Monday morning, August 5th, when stocks were just crashing and period of significant volatility. That was a very deflationary event. We could have something like that happen, but the government's response is always to open up the fire hose and pump money into the system. So I think before we get out of this decade, we're going to see higher inflation again, possibly 2 more times. So be prepared for that.
In the next 5.5 years, potentially 2 more rounds.
Yep.
Honestly, Jack, I'll make, I don't think that's fair because I'll make the argument we're potentially in our second round right now. Potentially. I mean, who we can, I mean, what data are we using?
I mean, if you want to go by just the consumer price index, understanding that's a flawed measure of inflation.
Yeah.
But
Are we going to use the fraud data or the more fraud data? I mean, what
Yeah.
are we going to use for data? It sucks. I mean, it's really hard to understand what's going on when the data is constantly being changed and the data is being computed by backing into information, backing into numbers. And
and
man, I just
downwardly
really,
revised later on. Yeah.
and they don't talk
Downward.
about that. They did the celebration and the revising downward behind our backs, and they just continue on and hope no one asks any questions. But
By
we
the way,
ask questions here.
I don't know when this video is going to air, but there's rumor going around that the jobs numbers, the BLS numbers, are going to be downwardly revised by somewhere from 600,000 to 1 million on Wednesday this week. I don't know if that's going to play out or not. It would not surprise me though, and it's just going to be funny to watch them squirm and try to explain that away when 1 million jobs that were created just suddenly poof. Oh, just kidding, they never happened.
I'm going to try to get this video out by Wednesday morning. And just in case I do, you guys, good morning. Happy Wednesday. You guys have a great week. And don't forget again, you can stop by Jack's, let him know I sent you. And if you're out there investing in real estate, you guys already know we wish you luck and we hope you win.